Could you say something about what effects then we're having as a Buddhist movement on the, as it were, outside world?
Well, the outside is very big. I mean, we're only a few thousands, or if one includes all our friends and contacts in India, we're only perhaps 100,000 or so. So outside the movement, well, there are millions, there are billions of people. So clearly we are not having a very big influence outside in that sense. But nonetheless, we are a very young movement, and we are still quite a small movement. But I do know that in places like East London, places like Pune, where there is a heavier, so to speak, concentration of our activities, we definitely do begin to have an effect outside, in the neighborhood, in the particular locality, begin to have an influence on prominent local people, on councillors and people of that sort, and in some cases even attract quite favourable comment from people, make a quite favourable impression. So that can only increase through our charity Aid for India, which is raising funds to help our work among the ex-untouchables in India. We've come in contact with quite a few thousand people who now realise that at least one Buddhist movement in the West is concerned with the plight of less fortunate people in the third world. So in that way we've had some contact with the outside and made some impression there in a positive way.
Could you perhaps say what effects we're actually having within the Buddhist world itself?
We are becoming a little better known to some parts of the Buddhist world, especially in the East, and here and there we are being paid the compliment of imitation. Here and there people are trying to imitate what we're doing because they're quite impressed by our success, but they try to imitate what we're doing without really understanding what it is that has made us successful. I did hear recently that the leader of a quite important Buddhist group in the West had stated that there were only two people in the West who had succeeded in creating a Buddhist community, a Sangha. And he said one of those was Jiu Kennett in the United States, and the other was Sangharakshita in England. I thought this really quite interesting, that the leader of an important Buddhist group in the West had actually said such a thing, recognizing that he himself had not been able to create a spiritual community or Sangha, whereas Jiu Kennett and Sangharakshita had each been able to do this. So there was quite a discussion one day here in the Order Office community after lunch, and we were talking, why was it that some Buddhist groups or movements, though quite extensive, had not succeeded in creating a Buddhist spiritual community or a Sangha. All sorts of explanations were offered and comments were made, and I gave a few explanations myself. But later on I thought about this, and the thought came to me that it's really a very simple matter. There's no great mystery about starting a Sangha or a spiritual community. There's no trick. There's no particular technique. You only have to do one thing. You just have to practice the Dharma. If you practice the Dharma and somebody else is practicing the Dharma and you're in contact with that other person who is practicing the Dharma, then you will be a Sangha. So what is the Sangha? The Sangha is simply people who practice the Dharma together. So those Buddhist groups or Buddhist movements that have not succeeded in creating a real spiritual community, a real Sangha, as distinct from a lot of people who are wearing the same ecclesiastical uniform, they should ask themselves the question, are we practicing the Dharma correctly? Because if you were practicing the Dharma correctly, and after all there's quite a lot of you, you must end up with a Sangha. So either your approach is entirely wrong, or you haven't practiced enough. But you have to recognize that if you practice the Dharma at all, to that extent you will constitute, you will create a Sangha.